My name is Felix, 27 this year. The greatest achievement in my life is becoming the wheelchair companion of the eldest daughter of the Langston family. Put nicely, I'm her husband. Put bluntly, I'm a caretaker bought for $3 million by the Langston family, with a marriage certificate thrown in. It all started 2 years ago. Back then, I was hauling bricks at a construction site. No, let me correct that, I was a site supervisor. Monthly salary, $6,500. I lived in a rented room in the urban village. My younger brother got into college. Tuition, $8,800. My dad farms back in our hometown, he can't scrape together that amount in a whole year. My mom's medicine costs $2,300 a month. I inserted my bank card into the ATM, and the balance showed 12,000 yuan. After paying my younger brother's tuition, that amount wasn't even enough to cover 2 months of my mother's medication. Just as I was about to resort to borrowing from loan sharks, a middle-aged man approached me that evening. Mr. Felix, I represent the Langston family and would like to discuss a deal with you. He handed me a contract, with the words, Marriage Entrustment Agreement, printed on the cover. I almost thought I was in a movie. The terms of the contract were simple: legally marry Sylvia, the eldest daughter of the Langston family, visit the nursing home 3 times a week for companionship, each visit lasting no less than 4 hours, for a period of 2 years. After the term ends, whether Sylvia recovers or not, the Langston family will pay me $3 million. $3 million. At that moment, only one thought crossed my mind: this could pull my family out of the mud, with more than half left over for my younger brother to get married. Why me? I asked. The middle-aged man replied expressionlessly, because you are ordinary enough. Ordinary enough. Those words stung me deeply. But I still signed. The next day, I met Sylvia. She lay on a bed larger than my entire room, surrounded by various instruments I couldn't name. On the 3rd day, I noticed her face was small, her chin sharp, and her skin as pale as if it had never seen the sun. Her eyelashes were long, resting quietly on her eyelids like 2 tiny fans. I stood by the bed, at a loss. This was the heiress of the Langston Group, the Langston family that had become the richest in the province through their new energy business. She was in a car accident on the highway a year ago, suffered brain trauma, and became a vegetable. The doctor said her chance of waking up was less than 5%. I cleared my throat, not knowing what to say. Finally, I blurted out, "Hello, my name is Felix. From now on, I'm your husband. Even though it's a contract job." The beeping of the monitor didn't change. I breathed a sigh of relief. After all, she couldn't hear me anyway. The rules for accompanying her were simple: every time I came, I sat by her bedside, said whatever I wanted, or just sat there if I didn't feel like talking. I chose to talk. Since no one was listening anyway, it was like bragging to a tree hollow. "Honey, I got scolded by the foreman today. He said my measurements were off, so I shot back, if you're so good, you do it." And he actually did. His lines were even more crooked than mine. Hilarious. "Honey, my little brother got 3rd in his class and called to brag." I told him, back in the day, I was also 3rd in my class, just counting from the bottom. He was silent for 5 seconds, then said, "Bro, you're such a letdown. Honey, there's a new nurse at the station today. She has dimples when she smiles." I took a second look, and she asked if I was a family member. I said, "I'm your husband." The look on her face, TSK, she was probably thinking, what's this guy after? At that point, I laughed to myself. What am I after? Money, of course. What, you think I'm after her looks? Well, okay, maybe a little. Sylvia's face, how should I put it? It's the kind of face you'd see on a magazine cover and assume was overly photoshopped. Each individual feature is beautiful on its own, and together they're even more stunning. What a shame. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and said, if only you could wake up. We could just muddle through life together. I'm not after your family's money, I'll earn my own. It's not much, but it's enough to get by. I paused. Forget it, I'm bluffing. I do want the money. The hospital room was so quiet that only the sound of the machines remained. I sighed, pulled a thermal container out of my bag, and said, "Today I brought some pork rib soup, I made it myself. Don't be picky, it's my first time making it, so it might be a bit salty." I scooped up a spoonful of soup and brought it to her lips. Of course, it wouldn't go in. I was just used to the motion. Like those people who talk to an empty grave every day, knowing there will be no reply, but doing it long enough turns it into a ritual. "All right, I'll drink the soup for you. Next time, make it a bit lighter." I held the bowl and spooned down the pork rib soup I had made, one spoonful at a time. It was indeed too salty. A year passed like this. I became the most dedicated family member at the nursing home. Head nurse Mabel would smile whenever she saw me. "Felix, here again. Your Sylvia is looking well today." "Mabel, has she shown any reaction today?" I asked. "No." Mabel shook her head, but quickly added, "But with vegetative patients, you can't rush it. Some people wake up even after lying there for 5 or 6 years. 5 or 6 years. I did the math. The contract was only for 2 years. "I'll be going now." I stood up, walked to the door, and glanced back. Sunlight seeped through the gap in the curtains, falling on Sylvia's face. She was as still as a painting. "Good night, honey." I closed the door, and the sound of my footsteps echoed down the hallway. That night, when I returned to my rented apartment, I took out the contract and read it again. There were still 11 months left. In 11 months, 3 million would be credited to my account. I would be able to pay off my mother's debts, cover my brother's full 4-year college tuition, and even put a down payment on a house in our hometown county. And then I would be free. No longer Sylvia's contract husband. Thinking about it, I found myself feeling a bit lost. Damn it. I'm just a laborer, what the hell do I have to feel lost about? In the spring of the second year, 2 things happened. First, my mother's condition worsened, and she was admitted to the ICU. The daily cost was equivalent to half a month of my salary. I crouched in the hospital corridor, checking my bank card 3 times. Balance, 27,000 yuan. Not enough for a week. Second, my younger brother called to say he wanted to drop out of school and work. I tore into him over the phone, "If you dare drop out, I'll break your legs." After hanging up, I crouched in the stairwell, holding my head, not crying. What's the point of a man crying? But my eyes still reddened. The next day, I went to the nursing home, sat by Sylvia's bedside, and talked for a long time. "Honey, my mom is sick. ICU, thousands a day. My younger brother wants to drop out of school. I told him if he dares to, I'll break his legs, but as soon as I hung up, I regretted it. What do I have to pay his tuition with? I feel pretty useless. 29 years old, and I've accomplished nothing. I can't even earn enough for my mom's medical bills. Tell me, are you blind? How did you end up picking a loser like me to be your husband? Oh right, your eyes aren't open. You didn't see." I let out a laugh, a very unpleasant one. "Forget it, no point talking to you. You're a vegetable, telling you won't do any good." I stood up and prepared to leave. At the doorway, I stopped again. For some reason, I turned back to take one last look. Sylvia was still in the same position, her eyelashes quietly lowered. But her fingers. I stared at her hand for 3 seconds. Nothing moved. I must have seen it wrong. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Still motionless. Ah, I'm starting to hallucinate. I patted my face, pulled open the door, and walked out. That night, I had a dream. In the dream, Sylvia opened her eyes, looked at me, and said, "The rib soup was too salty. Next time, use less salt." I was jolted awake. Another 3 months passed. There are only 60 days left until the contract expires. My mom was transferred from the ICU to a regular ward, but she still needs long-term treatment. For my younger brother's tuition, I asked the foreman for an advance on half a year's wages and also took out an online loan, barely scraping the money together. With my mom's medical expenses on top of that, I'm now over 400,000 yuan in debt. I do the math every day. When the contract expires, 3 million yuan will hit my account, and after paying off the debt, I'll still have over 2 million left. Enough to buy an apartment in my hometown county and open a small shop. And then I divorced Sylvia. Divorce. I think about divorce but don't know why. Every time I think about it, I feel a tightness in my chest. Am I sick? Developing feelings for a vegetable. That afternoon, I sat by her bedside, peeling an orange, stuffing one segment after another into my mouth. "Honey, I have something to tell you. I think I might have fallen for you. Even though you've been lying here all along, never saying a word to me. But I've just gotten used to coming here every day, gotten used to talking to you, gotten used to calling you my wife." I threw the orange peel into the trash can. You know what the worst part is? I don't know if I truly like you, or if I've just brainwashed myself by calling you wife every day. Am I messed up or what? The monitor beeped steadily, as if answering me. Forget it, don't answer. I'd be even more scared if you did. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and drifted off into a hazy sleep. In my dream, someone was stroking my head. Gently, coolly. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt as heavy as lead. I could only faintly catch a very light floral scent. It wasn't the smell of the hospital room. It was the scent of Sylvia. There were 30 days left until the contract expired. That afternoon, I went to the nursing home as usual. When I pushed open the ward door, the nurse was inside changing the sheets. Seeing me come in, she smiled, "You're here. All of Sylvia's indicators are good today," the doctor said. Before the nurse could finish speaking, a voice came from the bed. It wasn't the sound of the monitor. It wasn't the sound of a car outside the window. It was a human voice. Hoarse, like a string that hadn't been plucked in a long time. "You, get out first." The bedsheet in the nurse's hand fell to the floor. So did mine. My mind felt as if someone had pressed the pause button. I slowly turned my head and looked at the bed where she had been lying for nearly 2 years. Sylvia's eyes were open. Those eyes were deep brown, with the light from the window reflected in her pupils. She was looking at me. Her lips moved slightly. "You, dumbstruck." I opened my mouth, but not a single word came out. There was only one thought spinning wildly in my mind: when did she wake up? How much did she hear? Did she hear me say I liked her? Did she hear me say I was sick? Did she hear? "You said I might be sick." Sylvia's voice was very soft and slow, like a child just learning to speak, but every word was crystal clear. "I don't think you're sick. You just talk too much." My legs went weak, and I sat down directly on the floor. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Doctor! Nurse! She's awake! Sylvia is awake!" A soft laugh came from the bed. She said, "No need to call out. I've been awake for a while." I lifted my head, staring at her with wide eyes. "A while, how long is that?" Sylvia tilted her head slightly, as if recalling. "About 3 months. 3 months." I began frantically recalling every word I had said over these past 3 months. 3 months ago, I told you I dreamed that my mom was better, and I cried so much I soaked half my pillow. Did you hear that? I heard it. I told you I got my foot hit by a brick at the construction site, and I cursed for 10 minutes straight from the pain. Did you hear that too? I heard it. I said I like you. I heard you. The room fell silent. The beeping of the monitor suddenly became especially loud. I sat on the floor, feeling my face burn from my chin upward, all the way to my ears, and then to the top of my head. Then why were you pretending to sleep? I blurted out. Sylvia blinked. Because you're interesting to talk to. Interesting my ass. What were you thinking when I said I liked you? The corners of her mouth lifted slightly. I was thinking, does the like you mentioned refer to the kind within the contract, or the kind outside of it? I was stunned. Also, she added, when you said you've gotten used to coming every day, is it really a habit, or are you being forced by the 3 million? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I've been lying here for nearly 2 years, and no one has talked to me that much. Sylvia's voice softened. You're the first. And the only one. That's why I wanted to listen a few more days. She said it very calmly, as if stating something ordinary. But I saw her hands trembling slightly. Are you insane? I stood up, my legs still weak, steadying myself against the bedside. You woke up and didn't say a word, you just pretended to sleep so you could listen to me brag. Do you have any idea how much I know? She cut me off. Your mom is sick, your brother is going to drop out of school, and you owe 400,000 in online loans. You do the math every day, figuring out how much you'll have left after the contract ends and you get 3 million. She looked at me, with something indescribable in her eyes. I know how hard it is for you. Because you talk in your sleep. What did I say? You said, Sylvia, if you wake up, I don't want the 3 million anymore. Just say one word to me. My tears fell at that moment. Not because of embarrassment. It was because I didn't even remember saying those words myself. It was because in the dream, I spoke from the heart. The news of Sylvia waking up spread throughout the entire Langston family within 24 hours. The next day, 2 bodyguards appeared at the door of the hospital room. At the end of the corridor stood a man. In his 40s, well-maintained, with his hair combed immaculately and wearing a custom-tailored suit. But the calculation in his eyes was inversely proportional to the quality of his clothes. Alden. Sylvia's uncle. The current vice president of the Langston Group. Sylvia's father passed away from illness 3 years ago, and the Langston Group has been managed by Alden as proxy. Sylvia is the sole legal heir, waiting for her to wake up, waiting for her to turn 30. She is 28 this year. 2 more years to go. You're Felix. Alden looked me up and down, his gaze like that of someone examining a rat crawling out of a sewer. Yes. A contract husband? Yes. He laughed, a very dignified laugh, but also a very cold one. You've worked hard. But now that Sylvia is awake, your task is complete. He pulled a document from the inner pocket of his suit. The divorce agreement, I've already had the lawyer prepare it. Sign it, and 3 million will be transferred to your card in full. I stared at the document, which bore the words, divorce agreement, printed on it. And then? I asked. Then you'll be free. Go do whatever you want. Did Sylvia agree? Alden's smile faded slightly. She just woke up, there are many things she's not clear about yet. Once she understands the situation. Then we'll talk after she understands. I walked past him toward the hospital room. Felix. His voice turned cold. A bricklayer with 400,000 in debt, do you really think you can climb up to the Gu family's high branch? I stopped and turned to look at him. I'm not a bricklayer, I'm a construction supervisor. Is there a difference? Yes. A bricklayer makes 300 a day, a construction supervisor makes 6,000 a month. I earn less, but I don't steal or rob. Alden's mouth twitched. At that moment, the ward door opened. Sylvia was sitting in a wheelchair, pushed out by a nurse. She had changed into a light blue hospital gown today, her hair casually tied back with a hair tie. Seeing the commotion in the hallway, she raised an eyebrow. "Uncle." Alden's face immediately broke into a smile. "Sylvia. How's your recovery? I brought you some bird's nest. Where's my husband?" Her gaze passed over Alden and landed on me. "Come here." I walked closer. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist, not with much force, but they were tight. Alden's face stiffened for a moment. "Sylvia, this person is just in a contractual relationship with you." Sylvia said calmly, "A contractual relationship is still a relationship. As long as it's legal. Is there a problem?" "I'm just saying that when he married you in the first place, his intentions weren't pure." "I understand your purpose." Sylvia's thumb gently traced a line on my wrist. "Much clearer than those little tricks you pulled at the board meeting." The air suddenly grew very still. Alden's face paled for a moment. "Uncle, are you more anxious about the divorce than I am?" Sylvia tilted her head. "If I don't agree to it, wouldn't that be inconvenient for you?" Alden said nothing. His jaw was so tight you could see the veins. "My marriage, I'll decide for myself." Sylvia let go of my wrist, patted the armrest of the wheelchair, and said, "Uncle, go back to your work." She glanced at the nurse, who turned the wheelchair around. As she passed by Alden, she suddenly stopped. "Oh, by the way." She tilted her head, looked at Alden, and smiled. "My husband once said something that I think is absolutely right." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Don't bother with this self-righteous fool, wasting words on him is a waste of life.'" Alden's face turned green. I was stunned. Sylvia had already been wheeled into the ward, leaving behind a silhouette in the hallway. And a soft laugh. Alden stared at me for 3 seconds. That look in his eyes, as if he wanted to devour me alive. "Felix, just you wait." Then he left with the lawyer. I stood in the hallway, with only one thought in my mind: this woman would be the death of me. Sylvia recovered much faster than the doctors had anticipated. By the second week after waking up, she was already able to walk on her own. In the third week, she started handling company emails. In the fourth week, she notified the group, "Prepare to convene a board meeting to discuss the transfer of management authority." Alden did not sit idly by. 3 days before the board meeting, an anonymous email was sent to all shareholders and major media outlets. The content is the full text of the marriage contract between Sylvia and me, along with a carefully edited surveillance video, footage of me entering and leaving the nursing home, with a voiceover: "The husband of Sylvia, the legal heir of the Langston Group, is a fraud who entered into a fake marriage for $3 million. Within 2 hours, the email had spread throughout the business world. The stock price of the Langston Group fell by 4% that day. Reporters were blocking the entrance of the nursing home. I sat in Sylvia's hospital room, scrolling through the comments on my phone. "The kept man has been exposed. $3 million for a husband, what a bargain. The Langston Group has lost all its face." I placed my phone face down on the table. "I'm leaving." Sylvia looked up from her computer. "What?" I looked at her. "My presence is a liability to you. Your uncle has already prepared the divorce agreement. I'll sign it. That makes things simple. Felix." She stood up, walked over to me, and looked up at me. "You said something once. Do you remember?" "I've said a lot of things. You'll have to specify which one." "November 17th last year. A little past 1 in the morning." Her memory was absurdly sharp. "You said, actually, I stopped doing this for the money a long time ago. It's just. I want to be with you." I stopped breathing for a beat. That night, I came to the nursing home very late after working overtime. My mom had just had surgery, my brother had gotten into a fight at school, and the foreman had docked half a month of my wages. I sat by her bedside, held her hand, and talked a lot. Among the things I said was this one sentence. I feel like you're too alone here. If you ever wake up one day with no one around, that would be unbearable. So I have to be here. Do you acknowledge these words, or not? I looked into her eyes. There was no interrogation, no coercion. Only a quiet certainty. I admit it, I said. Then don't leave. But outside. I'll handle things outside. She turned around and took a USB drive from the drawer. This is the surveillance audio from the nursing home. My eyes widened. There's audio recording in the ward. She shook the USB drive. It's used to record vital signs. Every day. My soul began to leave my body. 2 years of recordings are all in there. From your rambling nonsense, to your heartfelt words, to your bragging. Wait. I leaned against the wall. What are you planning to do? She put the USB drive into her pocket. At tomorrow's press conference. I'll play a clip. Which clip? Don't worry. She walked to the door and paused for a moment as she passed by me. Turning her head slightly, her lips almost touched my ear. It's the part where you're least embarrassed. Then she left. I leaned against the wall and slowly slid down to sit on the floor. The next afternoon. Langston Group Headquarters, first floor auditorium. Media from across the city had gathered. Cameras were packed tightly, flashes overlapping into a sea of light. Sylvia stood on stage, wearing a black suit dress, her hair pinned up, her lipstick a bold red. She radiated full authority. It was impossible to tell that just a month ago, she had been in a wheelchair. Regarding the widely circulated marriage contract incident, her voice echoed through the microphone across the venue. I have 3 points to make. First, the contract is real. 2 years ago, I was in a coma due to a car accident, and my family arranged a caregiver for me, signing a contract in the process. Camera flashes went off wildly. Second, the content of the contract differs from the facts. She pressed the remote control. The large screen behind her lit up. An audio clip began to play. It was my voice. Honey, it's gotten colder today. Is your blanket thick enough? I asked the nurse to add another one. I brought you a hand warmer and placed it by your pillow. Your hands are always cold, they need to be kept warm. The stock market dropped again today. That CFO of your group isn't up to the job, the financial reports look like a grade schooler's homework. When you wake up, you need to replace them. Someone in the audience laughed. Then another. The sound was softer, like deep in the night. Today, my younger brother called me and said he wanted to drop out of school to work. I couldn't help it, I cried. I just crouched in the hallway, like an idiot. I've never cried in front of anyone before. But you're different. You're not just anyone. You're my wife. Even though you can't hear me. The whole room fell silent. A reporter lowered their camera. Then came a later recording. Sylvia, I had a dream today. I dreamed you woke up and said something to me. You said, the pork rib soup is too salty. I laughed for a long time in the dream. When I woke up laughing, the pillow was wet. The audio ended. The lecture hall was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioner could be heard. Sylvia stood on the stage, her expression calm. These recordings are from random days over 2 years of caregiving. 730 days, and every single day was like this. You could call this a contract. She tilted her head. But over 700 good nights, they can't be written into any contract. Silence. Then applause rose. At first it was sparse, then it grew denser and denser. Finally, it surged like a tidal wave. I stood at the side of the stage, watching her back under the spotlight. Something in my chest swelled, so full it choked my throat and made it ache. Alden sat in the corner, his face ashen. On his lawyer's phone, the stock price of the Langston Group had already started to climb back up. Online comments have already turned into, "What kind of fairy tale husband is this? Over 700 goodnights, I'm crying. Alden, do you even have any shame left?" Alden gripped the armrest of the chair, his knuckles turning white. This battle. He had lost everything, down to his last shred of dignity. After the press conference, everything changed. Alden was asked by the board to take a leave of absence. Sylvia officially became the interim CEO of the Langston Group. My identity shifted from contract husband to, well, real husband. Although we haven't truly done that yet. But something has already changed. For instance, she no longer calls me Felix. She calls me darling. For instance, I no longer sit by the bedside. Instead, I sit on her bed. Even if it's just to chat with her until late at night. One evening, I was lying on her hospital bed, which she insisted I do, and she leaned against my shoulder, flipping through a thick notebook. I asked, "What's this?" She said, "A collection of your sayings." I nearly rolled off the bed. "What?" She turned a page. "Every interesting thing you've said, I've written it all down." Dense handwriting. Each entry was marked with a date. March 14, 2023, "Honey, I got scolded by the foreman today." I shot back, "If you're so good, you do it," and he actually did. His layout was even more crooked than mine. Ha ha ha. May 7, 2023, "It rained heavily today, and I didn't bring an umbrella. I got completely soaked. But it doesn't matter, since you wouldn't know how miserable I looked." September 1, 2023, "If you were awake, would you look down on me?" Ah, forget it, you can't talk, so I'll just assume you said no. February 14, 2024, "Happy Valentine's Day. Even though you don't know. But as long as I know, that's enough." I flipped through the pages one by one. My cheeks grew hotter and hotter. I asked, "Why did you write all these down?" She said, "Save it for a book later." What book? A collection of quotes from a man with a vegetative wife. She thought for a moment, or maybe 730 goodnights. "Sylvia, don't. Call me wife." "Wife, don't." "Don't what?" She looked up, her eyes full of laughter. The lights in the hospital room had already been turned off, with only the moonlight streaming in through the window. Her eyes sparkled like stars in the moonlight. I looked at her. I wanted to say something tough. But there was only one thought in my mind. 2 years ago, I thought I was here to work. 2 years later, I realized, I was here to win over my wife. And she had been watching the whole game live. That notebook, I reached out to grab it, "Let me see what you wrote at the end." "No." She hid the notebook behind her back, "I'll show it to you on our wedding anniversary. It's been 2 years since we got married. That doesn't count. Back then, you weren't willing." She tilted her head and looked at me. "Now, are you willing?" I looked at her. Moonlight fell on her hair, the stray strands gleaming with a silver edge in the light. 2 years ago, I did it for 3 million. Now. I walked over. From behind her, I pulled out that notebook. I flipped to the last page. I picked up the pen by the bedside. In the blank space, I wrote a line. She leaned over to look. After reading it, her ears turned red. Her face flushed too. "You." I tossed the pen back. "It's in black and white. You have the recording, and you have the written statement. What more do you want?" She looked up at me. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. "Then I'll keep it safe. Don't go back on your word later. No regrets." I closed the notebook and hugged it to my chest. She looked at me in the moonlight, her eyes still red, but a small smile curling at the corners of her lips. Honey, about that sentence you wrote, can I take it back? My heart tightened. It's already written, in black and white. I'm not backing out. She took my fingers gently. I just want to add one more sentence. She pulled the notebook from my arms, flipped to the last page, and added a line beneath the one I had written. Then she turned the notebook around for me to see. It read, "From now on, all my embarrassing moments will only be known to you." Below was the line she had just written, "I remember all your embarrassing moments. But I won't tell anyone else." I was stunned for a moment, then burst out laughing. Then what's the difference between that and telling someone else? You yourself are someone else. I'm not someone else. She hugged the notebook back to her chest, standing her ground. I'm your wife. The bird outside the window chirped again. I didn't argue anymore, because she was right.